The Wendling Brothers are important because they preserved history before people even knew what that meant when it came to the automobile. Really unsung heroes.
When we are done with something, particularly today, what do? We toss it. But then people cherish things. They had to last for more than generations. These guys were pioneering it in an area that hadn't been considered at that time.
It's not until you look at it, hindsight, that you realize, wow, that was pretty amazing.
George and Robert started working in Fleetwood in the late 1920s.
They were apprentice bodybuilders at the Fleetwood factory. That's where they learned the art of constructing a car, basically from scratch, which is what they did out there.
The Fleetwood Metal Body Company, they did everything in-house. They wore ash wood frames with hand-formed aluminum.
This was a serious company that was building some of the best coach-built cars in the world. The work that they put into certain things on these cars, especially back in the 20s and 30s, was way above and beyond.
Packard was one of the biggest customers for Fleetwood. Lincoln, the third Duesenberg ever made, was bodied in Fleetwood.
And to think that the Wendling Brothers were there, part of Fleetwood, in the very beginning of what structured the coach building world. Fleetwood's goal was craftsmanship, durability, and that understated style. Hence why General Motors wanted that under their roof.
Cadillac wanted to be the premier manufacturer of luxury cars. So in 1925, Fisher Body bought the Fleetwood Metal Body Company.
They moved it in 1930 to Detroit.
George and Robert had the opportunity to move to Detroit along with the factory, but they didn't want to move.
They essentially went into the auto body business, the repair business.
In '37, they moved to Macungie, and that's when they really started the Body Works. Yeah, this was at the very beginning.
Yep.
When my dad bought the building.
Yep.
But at this particular time, all it was a body shop, fixed the neighborhood cars. We were known as the kids at that time to my dad and uncle.
Donald and Dalton sort of grew up with it. They learned the trades from their father and their uncle.
While we were still in high school, we both worked in the shop. And then right after high school, went full-time. Along come the 50s, and my uncle bought an L car, sedan.
Yeah, that's right.
Remember that car?
Yeah,
And him and I both really liked that car. It was just a common sedan, but it was in great shape at the time yet. And that's when we started falling in love with old cars. The restoration work started in 1950. There were a bunch of guys from New York and New Jersey and Connecticut that needed cars restored. Most of them had Packards and Lincolns and
Expensive cars, yeah.
Cadillacs and Pierce Arrows, things like that. And it just kept growing. At that time, there were very few restoration shops in the country.
They would paint some cars and they would take them to the show in Hershey. And people would come up and say, who painted your car for you? I said, oh, we did it ourselves. Will you paint my car? Will you paint my car? And that's how the whole restoration thing began.
People were searching these guys out and bringing their cars here. When you're an entrepreneurial type of person, you have a certain level of fearlessness. You're going to jump into the next project and you're going to go. Clearly they were willing to do it, because to restore cars as a business in the 1950s and 60s, I mean, it just blows me away. I look back at those photos and I'm like, it's so incredible to see these cars here. To think that they were in Macungie, Pennsylvania. These are the kind of cars that would be going to Pebble Beach today. And yet they were passing through their shop often in multiples. You could do a Concours just from the cars they worked on over the years.
There were many cars that went through the shop and the people would take them to shows and they'd first prize, first place. And it wasn't that that's what they were shooting for, that's just the way they did it.
We worked hard, but we enjoyed it. We really enjoyed it. It was a different life, completely. Gasoline was 47 cents a gallon. How would we like that today, huh?
They had a hard work ethic. They were perfectionists. You do it right. I don't know if that's part of the German culture, but that's how the Pennsylvania Dutch are.
I started there when I was 15 years old, and I actually kind of fell into family that wasn't my real family. Bob and George talked Pennsylvania Dutch all the time, so I felt like I was at my great-grandmother's house because she didn't know anything but Pennsylvania Dutch.
Well, I'll tell you a line. Kannst du Mikke fangen? Can you catch flies?
The saying, if you ain't Dutch, you ain't much.
In the day, the Wendlings were the place. I mean, their skill level early on was phenomenal. They could take a piece of metal and hammer out a brand new fender. Now bear in mind, they were doing this with hammers.
Donald would clamp a piece of flat sheet metal on the fender. And so he starts heating spots and spots, and tapping it with a hammer, and then curling it around and shaping it. And in less than an hour, he had this piece made. Well, then he cuts out the old steel, welds it in place, and it looks like it was there all the time. And I'm like, that was way too easy.
There's something about taking a piece of sheet metal and forming it into something that's artistic, making that metal do what you want it to do.
My father's first Jaguar E-Type, he had a coupe, and Donald Wendling hand-striped the car. He did a stripe that went right around the bulge in the bonnet and came around the sides of the car. It always amazed me, to this day, that he hand-striped this this stuff. He just, with a brush.
It was a sword brush, you know, about that long. I was always intrigued by my dad's pinstriping, you know. I mean, he was really good, and I learned that from him. And he got into upholstering.
Dalton was the only guy you go to for the interior.
I mean, these are cars that come, they're rusted and they're old. They'd be convertibles, and Dalton would just sew the top. And the interior, the whole, anything that was upholstered had to do with cloth in the car, he did it.
We just wanted it to please the customer.
You know, people would come from all over to have them match colors.
If you could see a difference between what you painted and the rest of the car, it wasn't good enough.
Sometimes that's all we did the whole day long was matching paints. We just did it by eye. We started putting in a tint here, a tint there, staring at it, looking at it. Didn't suit us. We kept going until this paint matched the next panel. When we'd make out a bill, we'd look at the total. We'd say, that's just too much. And we'd start deducting.
Businessmen, they were not. They didn't have it in them to charge for all the hours they worked.
We did what we thought was right, and I have no regrets on it.
They did it with such a passion. They didn't think of, publicity. They didn't think of, making money. They just enjoyed it, and the authenticity and everything they did, everything they touched was, for my world, gold.
Das Awkscht Fescht started in 1964. Leroy Schaefer, George Wendling, and Robert Wendling are founders of it.
They were familiar going to the show out in Hershey. Well, why don't we do one in Macungie? The original show, actually, they used a lot of their own cars.
On the first year, the first event, the cars were coming in, they were floored. They had something like 350 cars their very first show. He said they thought they were going to be lucky if they had 100 cars show up. At its peak in the early 2000s, they were lining up 1,400 cars a day. I mean, it's just amazing what it grew into.
So once again, they were pioneering in that respect. They dabbled in all kinds of pioneering.
Around 1973, 74, Robert and George retired.
When they left, they finally said, that's it, they're gonna turn it over to us. It was sort of sad. I wouldn't say it was one of the better days. The best thing they done for us was teach us how to be good, honest men.
In 76, Donald and Dalton decided to launch Wendling Restorations.
And that's all they did then. For my grandfather and my great uncle to say, okay, this is my ceiling, and then Dad and Dalton take it from there and take it another step farther was amazing.
It was like dealing with the same people, but a new generation.
Cars were our life. I just loved my automobiles. I washed them twice a week, whether they had to be or not.
They knew how to do the old craftsmanship the old way. As the technology of restoration changed, they really weren't able to change with it. They were very much Renaissance artisans, and the industry left them behind.
They started getting a little bit fanatical about restoration work. I always said we build our cars to have fun with them. And later on, they built them to almost make gods out of these cars and worship these cars. They were afraid to use them. We enjoyed them. We used them and had fun. I don't know. I just think it went so fast, I can't believe it.
I'm 85 and these, what, 83?
Yeah, 83.
It's hard getting some responses from them because my dad and Dalton do not see how incredibly talented they are.
I do not find it out of character that today, as old men, they don't appreciate their own history. They don't appreciate what they did and what they accomplished.
It was just an everyday life to us. Why would you be interested in what him and I done 50 years ago?
I just think people need to know that they were there from the start, and they deserve their due for that.
I only wish that George and Bob were here today to be able to really thank them and let them know there's not a car that I work on to present that I don't think about them. It all flashes back, and I pass that on to my guys.
The cars are going to be the lasting legacy for them. These cars are going to live on and on.
It's not until recent years that I realized how amazing the legacy is, and I am proud to be a part of that legacy.
You guys soon have to let me go before I get gray hair, you know that?